So how many of y'all been in one? Wow. That is really loud. How many of y'all been in one of these before? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Almost all of you. I don't know how these work. So am I supposed to stand up here and lecture for 50 minutes while y'all just sit and try to stay awake? Is that how this works? Because that sounds to me like it would be perfectly boring to do that, not just today, for 3 days. So here's the deal. I don't want to lecture, but if I'm not going to lecture, I need y'all to help me with that. So I would much rather for the next 3 days have a conversation with you guys if you will be willing not to sit there like zombies when I throw out a question to you. I know there are a lot of people in the room. It can be kind of awkward. But if we want to, I think, make this as useful as possible and I think more enjoyable for you, I need you to help me out with that. So my intent is to do that. When I actually ask a question, it'd be great if I wouldn't be met by a wall of silence, but you guys would kind of jump in and start talking. I don't even care if you raise your hand or anything. I'd just much rather have people jump in and let's talk about that. I'm also looking around the room, and I see that we have some older folks in the room. By older, I mean older than high school. And that means we have a great collection of wisdom in the room, and I am very thankful for that, very grateful that you're sitting here. I have a favor to ask of you. I know that you have a lot to share, but I'm really going to try to draw out the kids. And so as adults, sometimes we have a hard time pausing and waiting for them to jump in. I need you to help me by not filling that silence, okay? Maybe tempted to jump in to help them out, but let's just wait them out. Help me out with that, and I would really, really appreciate that. One other question. Have any of y'all ever had to endure one of my workbooks? Would you raise your hand if you've actually had to do? I just wanted to know who you are so I could apologize to you. I'm really sorry about that. I do want to say something about my workbooks. 25 years ago, I started publishing lesson books, and in 2004, I completed the very last workbook for teenagers. And I mentioned that to you because as part of the last workbook, I felt like I needed to acknowledge all the poor students, like those of you who raised your hand, who had to suffer through my classes while I was trying to figure out how to write this material. And so my wife and I sat down one afternoon and we started writing down the names of all of the kids we had had in Bible class during the years I was writing the workbooks. And so it took a while because we're old and we had to think about all of those names. And so when we were done, we compiled a list. I don't know, my wife's actually on the back row back there. I don't know, 50, 60 names, Heidi, I think is something like that we'd come up with. And so when we were finished, we were proud. We were looking at our list of 50 or 60 names of kids we'd had in Bible class. And we started thinking about the names. Because by now, these people who had been kids in Bible class are grown-ups. I mean, some of them are like grown up to the point of married and having children of their own. And we started noticing that we knew some of the names on the list were people who weren't still serving God. And we wondered how many. And so I pulled out a highlighter and we started going through and highlighting the names. Kids we'd had in Bible class that we knew as adults were no longer serving God. And we highlighted a lot of names. It really bothered me. It was almost 2 decades ago. Over the last 20 years, I've tried to think a lot about why it is that so many kids who grow up just like you, who sit in places just like this, at some point out there, turn their back on Jesus and they walk away from all of this. And then 10 years ago, my own son, who had grown up doing things just like this in a home with a mom and dad who were Christians and who went to Bible class his whole life. He grew up and he got married and he walked away from Jesus. Of course, now I'm really interested in this topic. Why does that happen? Why do people grow up with all the advantages that you guys have, like the privilege of someone arranging for you to be here today with a Bible to think about serving Jesus? Why do they one day out there somewhere down the road turn their back on Jesus and walk away? Why does that happen? So I really want to put my heart on the table right here at the beginning. Can I do that with you? And tell you what it is that I want for all of you. I want you to have a faith that lasts. In Matthew 7, as Jesus starts getting to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he sums up life in verses 13 and 14 as being about two roads: a broad way that leads to destruction and a narrow way that leads to life. So let me put my heart on the table and tell you what it is that I want for you guys. I want your journey to get all the way to the end of that narrow road that leads to life. I don't want there to ever be any point in your life where you turn around and you stop walking with Jesus. I don't ever want that to happen to any of you. And so, I get 3 hours with you over 3 days to kind of stir up your minds about having a faith like that. Okay? That's what I want us to talk about together in this time that we're going to have. So, to do that, I want to begin by just sort of brainstorming this question together today. Can we do that? I got one slide that I'm going to put up here. I'm going to put down the clicker because I'm not going to be messing with that anymore. The question that I want us just to talk about is, why do young people grow up and walk away from Jesus? What are the reasons that happens to far too many young people? And to get us started, I just want me and you to brainstorm that together today. I got some stuff written down. Maybe I'll look at it as we go along. Maybe I won't. It just kind of depends on what you give me and what we want to talk about. So a bunch of you are writing on stuff. That's great. Here's what I want you to write down. I want you to write down your answer to that question. Why do young people grow up and walk away from Jesus? What time is it? It's 10 after. So we got, 35 minutes to kind of kick around your answers to that. Will you write something down? And then I'm going to invite you to share with me, and I'll give you the first crack at this. Why do you think that happens? Someone in the back. I'm not forgetting about y'all, but I don't want to forget about them either. Raise your hand, want to jump in. Tell me what you mean by that. Will you unpack that a little bit? The desires of the flesh. What's that about in your mind? Okay. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. So can we just kind of work on that for a little bit? Because you talked about desires of the flesh, and I'm wondering if something I wrote in my notes aligns to what you're talking about there. I think one of the reasons that at some point out there, after we get away from home, and you described it beautifully, because while we're at home, somebody else gets to boss us around, right? Somebody else gets to make the rule. And while you're at home, because they provide the cell phone and the food, we have to go along with what mom and dad said. But there's a day coming somewhere out there when you will have a job, you will be paying the bills, it will be your life, and one of the things you'll get to do is you will get to make a choice about sin. Okay? And sometimes I think the reason people grow up and then get on their own and then they walk away is because they really want to sin. I hate that you guys are standing up in the back. There are like seats everywhere. So we'll wait. Go ahead. Y'all find a spot. Just drop right in there somewhere. There you go. There you go. It's all good. Now, there's some stuff underneath that, some realities underneath that, and these are important. I want you to think about this, because so many times we deal with surface stuff when we're talking about these problems, and there's deeper stuff underneath that we really, really have to think about. One reality underneath that is the fact that the devil is real, and culture's trying to mess up your thinking about that. And it will mess up your thinking if you abandon the idea that the devil is real. Listen, Jesus and the devil are a package deal. Go to Matthew chapter 4. Look at that text. Jesus has an encounter with the devil. He talks to the devil. They interact together. They argue with each other. If you want Jesus, you have to embrace that the devil is real, right? Secondly, you have to realize that the devil is after you. There is this battle you're engaging every day with the adversary. That's the 1 Peter 5 and verse 8 language, where he is the adversary that is pursuing us every single day. The last thing I need to tell you about the devil that's underneath all of this is that the devil is a liar. That is what Jesus says about him in John 8 and verse 44. If you go all the way back to Genesis 3, the fundamental tactic of your adversary is to lie to you about sin. Do y'all remember that in the Eve story? Do you remember what he says to her in Genesis chapter 3 when he's trying to get her to eat of the tree? He messes with her thinking about God. He says, God doesn't really want what's good for you. This tree, you eat this tree, great things will happen to you. You will be like God, right? And so he has been trying from the beginning to lie to us about sin. Sin isn't really bad. It really won't hurt you. You see it? And so I think you are right. And one of our struggles is that the devil is trying to convince us that sin is a good thing. And frankly, it really looks that way sometimes. I think about that. I think about young people raised up in a home where mom and dad, are your parents really restrictive about the internet? Y'all got rules about that? Like where you could surf and what you could look at? And do they hold you accountable? Do they check your devices, check your iPad, check your phone, stuff like that? See, when we're growing up at home, sometimes mom and dad are really careful to try to protect us from those sins. But think about when you go off to college, or when you're out on your own for the first time, have your job, get an apartment, get the Wi-Fi hooked up. And suddenly, nobody's checking. It's just you. And you have this device that is like the most amazing porn theater that's ever existed in the history of humanity. You can access anything. You can access an abundant amount of content. And if you start taking a peek, it's a thrill like maybe you've never had a thrill before. And the experience is pleasurable. And so there's this battle that takes place over sin. And I think that when you start dabbling in that, then there's this struggle that you're going to have to deal with. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but it's really, really pleasurable. And so you cave to it, and when you cave, how do you feel? When you cave to sin, you know you've sinned. How do you feel? What's the word? Say it. Guilty. So we feel bad after we do it. Why do we ever go back to it? Because the sin was pleasurable. So the pleasure starts gnawing us again. So this cycle takes over. That's what happens to us. We get this cycle. Drawn by the pleasure, violate the boundaries, feel guilty, but drawn by the pleasure. You can't keep living that way, guys. And so what some people do is they say, I want to sin. And to deal with that dissonance of trying to live in two worlds, they give up one of the worlds. And they walk away from Jesus. I do think sin is a reason that young people grow up and walk away. They're really just choosing sin over Jesus. Thank you for the answer. Spent some time on that one. I'm anxious to hear some others. Why do young people grow up and walk away from Jesus? All the way on the back row. Yes, ma'am. Big godlike voice. Let me hear it. Wow. So you said a couple of really important things. Thank you for that. The last thing you said was they didn't own their faith. Is that right? Did I hear you right? Or they didn't have their own faith. And then before that you said they never developed their own personal conviction. So that makes me think of a passage. Grab your Bible. Go over to 2 Timothy 3. There's something said here that I think is super important that I'd like for this to register in your minds, this language that he uses. This is Paul writing to the young preacher Timothy, 2 Timothy 3. This is a chapter where he's dealing a whole lot with a terribly, terribly evil world that Timothy is living in, and he's trying to counsel him about that. That kind of sounds like me and you, right? Living in a terribly, terribly wicked world. How do I function in that world? So we're getting to how Timothy functions. We're getting to that part. Look at verse 13. But evil men and impostors will proceed from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. You, however, you see it? You see him flip it over now? He said, that's your world. But you, so this is me and you. This is what I want you today to do, rather. Continue in the things you have learned and become convinced of, knowing from whom you have learned them. And from childhood you have known the sacred writings, which are able to give you the wisdom that leads to salvation through faith, which is in Christ Jesus. Go back to 14. Watch what he says. Continue in the things you have learned. Let's start with that. This is what he's always been taught, right? So you guys are growing up being taught some stuff. You're being taught some stuff today. You guys go to church on Sunday? Go to Bible class? You're taught some stuff. You got mom and dads who talk to you about the Bible, try to make Bible real in life, talk to you about that. You're learning some stuff. Do you ever remember a time when your family didn't go to church? I don't. I went to church my whole life, which means unlike the neighborhood kids where I lived, my parents drugged me out of bed on Sunday morning, put me in the car, made me put on nice clothes, and took me to Bible class. It took me to worship, and we sang songs, and the Lord's Supper was served, and there was preaching, long preaching. I grew up in a church where Roy Cogdell preached. Roy Cogdell would start by talking for 25 minutes, and then he would say, I need to get to my lesson today. And as a kid, I was thinking, there's more? And he would preach for like 50 minutes. Your guy preaches 40 minutes, and y'all think he's going long, right? Y'all have no idea. It was so hard, right? We did all that stuff. And so I think a lot of us grow up doing all of the religious stuff. Maybe for you, if you're like me, that's just been part of your life forever. And so what I'm worried about is we grow up kind of in this rut of doing this stuff. And you could do this stuff without ever really deciding about the stuff. Is this what I really believe? What was your phrase? Owning your faith. We don't ever do that. We just kind of do the stuff. Now, if you look back at our text, he's talking to Timothy about that. Continue in the things you have learned, doing the stuff, right? But what's the next phrase? What's he say next? You tell me. Oh, is that what your translation says? Is that like the skateboard Bible or something? What is that? ESV? I always say that about the ESV. Okay. My translation says, and become convinced of. See, it isn't just about continuing the things you've learned. That's somebody else's faith. That's mom and dad's faith. You've got to be convinced that is true. And I think what happens to a lot of young people is they never get to that place. You know, I still remember when that happened to me. And you know what's weird standing here talking to you about this? That happened to me literally 100 yards that way on this campus 40 years ago when I was a student at Florida College. I was taking a Farrell Jenkins Evidences Bible class. And I'm like walking out of class that day, walking that direction because that's where the girls' dorms were, after class. And I had this moment where my brain said, you know, all this stuff you've always believed, it really is true. I mean, there's real evidence that confirms this is really true. And literally, walking past, well, it was a dorm. That's not there anymore. Walking past a dorm, that thought occurred to me. That was kind of my moment where I was convicted. All of this is true. Let me tell you, if you get to that place where you've kind of thought this through for yourself and you are convinced, what did your translation, what does the ESV say? Yeah. When you have firmly believed it is so, let me tell you something about that. When someone comes along with something different than that and tries to start pushing on you, you're going to be hard to move. This is like a post set in concrete, right? And someone hits it with the car, what happens to it? The post is set in concrete. You're repairing your car because the post doesn't move. But if you're not really sure, and some new wind blows in, some new way of thinking about morality, or some new way of thinking religiously, or some new way of thinking all religion is wrong, and starts pushing on you, and you don't firmly believe, you're not set, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? You're going to get moved. Yeah. This is Ephesians 4, verse 14, where Paul talks about being blown about by every wind of doctrine. You're going to be susceptible to everything. And I think that's right. I think you're precisely correct in what you described. I think that's what happens to us. We grow up, we're doing all the religious stuff, but we've never really decided. And so we go off to college, and maybe we hear some things that are different from what we've always been taught, or we have some friends that begin to influence us, or we're dating a girl or a guy who thinks differently about this, and we begin to move because we never really firmly believed. And so one of the admonitions I'd give you is you got to really decide. You got to have that moment where you know these things I believe, they really are true. And if you're struggling with that, look, you need to ask for help. That's why we do this thing together, to help each other. How far have we gone? Oh, man, it's 25 after. Hand up. I couldn't tell if you were nodding off or if you wanted to jump in on this. So, yeah, please. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. The problem with your answer is there are about 30 things I'd like to say about all of that. Can I pick a couple, not to de-emphasize any of the other ones? I think one of the most important skills that you guys need to learn in life, whether the church does a good job teaching you this or not, is you need to learn how to be good students of the Bible, right? This is not about adopting what mom and dad told me. We can't just adopt what mom and dad told us. Why? We can't just adopt what mom and dad told us. Why? What? Mom and dad might be wrong, right? Because we try to reach people whose mom and dad taught them something different than what is true. Mom and dad are not right. My church is not right. God is right. His will is expressed in the Bible. So one of the most important skills that you can learn in your life is how to be a good student of the Bible. Really, really think that is important. I also want to seize on what you said about doubts. That's actually one of the things that I wrote down in my notes. Anybody ever struggle with doubts about what you believe? Come on. Have you ever struggled with doubts about what you believe? Raise your hand up nice and high. I want everyone to see that. Do you see that? Do you see that? What does that tell you about doubts? What? Yes. Yeah, we all struggle with doubts. I wasn't just raising my hand to motivate you. I have my own seasons where I wrestle with the things that I believe and I have to deal with doubts. Do you realize that that's biblical? Who's the famous doubter biblically? Oh, come on, man, don't whisper, say it. Thomas, yeah, you were saying it. Thomas, John chapter 20, verse 25, his fellow disciples have seen Jesus and they tell Thomas, and what is his response to that? You know it? Yeah. Thomas demands evidence. He says, I want to see and I want to touch with my hands the imprint of the nails. I want to see the wounds of Jesus. I'm not just believing it because you guys told me that. I don't know. We call Thomas the doubter. Not sure that's fair. But he certainly isn't willing to believe what his fellow disciples have told him. Okay? He's got to see the evidence. And so it is normal for you to have doubts and uncertainty. I don't want you to be embarrassed about that. Everybody does. Most importantly, I do not want you to bury your doubts, which is what I think we typically do. Can we explore that a little bit? Why do you think that Christians growing up among God's people have a tendency to bury their doubts? Why do we tend to do that? Let's see. Yes, ma'am, right? It's really funny that I got so many hands back here. Because the rebels sit in the back, right? That's why my wife's on the back row. I'm sorry, where were you? Where were you? Yes, ma'am. So I think everybody else has it together, and I don't want to be the bad one because I'm having doubts. Thank you for that. Other thoughts about that? Why do we bury our doubts? Yes, sir. Yeah, sometimes it's a little messy, isn't it? Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, yes, right back here. I'm afraid because I'm doubting. I just try to push it away. Yes, ma'am. You just bury it. Keep it to yourself. Thank you for that. Who am I missing? Yes, ma'am. See, you're sitting on the front row, and I'm looking right past you. Yeah. By your own mind, not deemed acceptable to have doubts. Thank you for that. Yes, sir. We bury it because everybody else is going along with this, and so I should go along with this too. I wonder. I want y'all help me with this. If you had doubts about whether or not God existed, is there someone in your church family that you would feel completely comfortable going to them and talking about that? Raise your hand if you feel that way. I am really happy about that because I am not sure that everybody feels that way. One of the things I really try to work on with church families all over the country is making you feel comfortable talking about your doubts. I try to tell young people that, and I try to tell older people, don't freak out when young people put their doubts on the table. It really bothers me to think that we're all getting together on Sunday and we're pretending. And we don't feel safe speaking up at Bible class and saying, okay, I'm struggling with the evolution thing. I mean, there's all the science for that. And I don't see how that lines up with Genesis, and I'm struggling with that. I worry that somebody can't say that in Bible class. Where's the better place to talk about that? I think that's the perfect place to talk about that, don't you? And so it may mean that you're going to have to take the risk to be willing to put it on the table and say, I'm not even sure there's a God. I'm having some doubts about that. Because like my friend's mother died, and he's devastated by that, and I'm not sure why God would let that happen. And it makes me wonder if there's a God at all. Those are reasonable questions to struggle with. And we need to be willing to talk about that. A church needs to be the safe place to help that, to make that happen. Listen, it will not help you. Y'all hear me on this? Everybody with me? It will not help you to bury your doubts. Why won't it help you to bury your doubts? Yeah, they're coming back, right? It's kind of like ignoring the fact that your house has termites, right? That may get you through today and not be a big deal, but there's a time coming when a storm, y'all been here in Florida, right? You know, hurricanes, right? Yeah. When the hurricane comes and you've been ignoring the termites, what's going to happen to your house? Yeah, it's going down, man, because there's nothing there holding it up. And I think sometimes young people lose their faith because, well, the fact is, it was lost a long time ago. They just kept up with the facade, kept doing the stuff, going to church on Sunday, sitting in Bible class, carrying a Bible, all that kind of cool stuff. But there was no substance there. And then when the storm comes and there's trial and there's difficulty or faith is challenged, the house just collapses because there was nothing there anymore. And what bugs me about that is I know young people who lose their faith not because they don't buy the evidence, but because they don't even know what it is. They never asked the question. They never studied. They never wrestled. It's messy, isn't it? You got to struggle with it sometimes. That's okay. That's what we're supposed to do together as a family. Got to deal with doubts. Thank you for that. I have a hand up back there. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad that you said that. Thank you for that, because I actually had it in my notes to say to you that one of the mistakes we make is we look in the wrong places to try to deal with our doubts. And the fact is that people who are old like me don't understand that you're doing that. So if you have a spiritual question and you're kind of, give you a real example. We've been talking to our church family about how we know the Bible's been accurately handed down to us. So if you were struggling with, are there any contradictions in the Bible? Where might you go hunting to find information on that? Go ahead and say it out loud. The internet? Yeah. See, old people don't know that you're doing that. And so I got on YouTube and I typed in, are there contradictions in the Bible? First 3 videos that came up, 12 contradictions in the Bible. And then something from an atheist organization. And then the next one down was same guy as the first one. 13 more contradictions in the Bible. And I thought, that wouldn't be helpful, right? And so I am concerned about that. When we're not talking about your doubts and you're digging around in other places, you may be digging in bad places. You may be getting bad data. Or at least, let's be fair to say, it's one-sided data. It's only giving you part of the story. So yeah, we got to deal with our doubts in a healthy way. I think it's interesting. You know, we call Thomas the doubter. When finally confronted by Jesus, did Jesus rebuke him? What did he do? Remember? Look at my hands. Feel the wounds. Be believing, not unbelieving. Gave him the evidence. Jesus wants to help you with your doubts. And so do we. Okay? How much time we got? I think we can slip in another answer, maybe. So my question was, you know what? You have been very patient with me. I am sorry. Now, do you want in on the last one or you got something new? Yeah, that's a really important thought. Let's grab a text on this. Go to John 6. Because I do think sometimes the problem is that I've already decided that I'm not going to keep doing this. And I'm just waiting until I get out from mom and dad's thumb so I can do what I want to do. So in the time we have left, I've just got a couple of minutes. I want to wrap up with this story for John 6 that'll kind of leave us for what we're going to work on tomorrow. John 6 starts with an amazing miracle. Jesus feeds these people, right? And the next day they come looking for him. And they're real excited about him. And when they find him, look at verse 26. Jesus rebukes them. He says, truly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. You guys are just looking for a free meal. He said, do not work for food which perishes, but for food which endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you, for on him the Father God has set his seal. He said, you guys need to look for the food that matters, real food, right? And so that starts an argument that goes on and on and on. It's like a whole sermon Jesus preaches about the bread of life. And it gets more edgy as he keeps going. Look at verse 60. We're getting down to the end of this now. Therefore, this is after the argument, many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, this is a difficult statement. Who can listen to it? To put it another way, we did not like this sermon. Then go down to 66. As a result of this, many of his disciples withdrew and were not walking with him anymore. So I want you to think about this. Literally, hundreds and hundreds of people at the end of John 6 are turning their back on Jesus and they're walking away. I want you to think about that. I hope that's unthinkable to you, that there would ever be a time in your life where you would turn your back on Jesus and walk away. And that's exactly what happens here. And so, hang with me. Hey, you guys have been great, by the way. Give me just 2 more minutes. In 67, Jesus says to the 12, you don't want to go away also, do you? And so going to the question of, I really don't care about this, this is what Peter said. 68, Lord, to whom should we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have believed and come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Number one, we're not going anywhere because we know who you are. And number two, we're not going anywhere because we know what you have. So when you're a teenager in high school, it's really hard to think about the fact that you're going to die. But that is the point. That all of us are ultimately going to die. What then? Your life is all about. It boils down to, it's not a choice or an important choice. Your life is defined by one single decision. Did I stay with Jesus or did I walk away? Your whole existence will be defined by that choice. It isn't an important life choice. This is your life. So tomorrow, I want to unpack a couple of other issues that we wrestle with that potentially impact whether or not our faith will last. I hope you'll come back and hang with me for that. Thank you. Guys have been great today. I appreciate y'all joining in. Forgive me for ignoring the person who sat on the front row.